In this video, I'm gonna make my own oil paint. Is it worth it? What are the advantages, pros and cons? These and so much more will be answered in this video, but the most important thing is it's so bloody satisfying to watch. And as it turns out, do. I have had for a while these pure pigments. I saw them in an art shop. They're really expensive. And I was like, there's a video on this 2 years ago. The day has come, finally. I don't know what to do, and I don't have the time or, let's face it, attention span to look up what to do. So I'm gonna figure it out as I go. Let's try and make some oil paint. You just have the raw pigment. I'm just mixing this on an acrylic sheet. So it's pigment, it says oil paint, so it's just pigment and oil, I believe. I'm doing this by feel to start off with, and I'll do it with instructions later. That's how I like to do things. I mean, I'm gonna guess it that much. Look at this. I feel like I'm inventing this process. It's obviously very lumpy, so I'm imagining there's gonna be a long process of getting the lumps out. You know what would be interesting? Let's get a red paint, put it by its side. Cadmium red. It's a little brighter. I feel like my pigment's stronger, like better. I'm gonna switch over to a bigger knife. That's not a knife. Hey, this is, yeah. It's low hanging fruit, I can't not. Satisfying. This is really satisfying. It's funny because I did think to myself when I bought the pigments, like, what's the point? Like, when you can just buy paint, why would you buy pigments, mix it yourself? And I think that's one of the reasons I like to experiment and figure it out rather than follow instructions, because I feel my way through some of the advantages, like pros and cons as to why one might do it this way. I like to feel the difference. And the difference to me immediately is I have complete control over consistency, which is super cool. I've never had that with oil paints before. So nice. Okay, so one of the other reasons I've held off from making this video is because, frankly, I was intimidated, because I thought there was gonna be a lot to it. I think I've seen a few TikToks or Instagram things where people are just mixing oil and pigments, and I'm like, maybe it's just oil and pigments. Oh my God, just look at it, it's so creamy, and it starts, you can see it lumpy, and just as they mix it and work it into itself, oh my God, it's like watching candy be made. That's so satisfying. I'm such a nerd. Why is this so exciting to me? I want the paint to glide a little bit, so I'm just gonna give it a little bit of oil. So we're gonna start off with the cadmium red from the tube. It's thicker than the stuff I made. That's okay, because I can make mine thicker, but let's just start off with this. All right, let's see if we can get the same texture with mine. I think I need to thicken it up though. That's pretty fun. It's definitely thicker, which is fun, like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to thicken it up, right? I know I'm biased, but I like mine more. Now, I started off making wilder movements in my addition of oil or pigment than I probably should have, because what I found as I continue to work it is the pigment seems to thin out a little bit as you work it, as you crush it and it moves into the oil. But it's really hard to draw that line between adding too much oil or pigment, so obviously the way to do it is incrementally, which is not usually how I do anything. So it's a good learning experience. So I'm gonna make a second color. This time I might go like a really rich golden orange. And that way I can mix that with my red to color match to the original tubed cadmium red, and maybe use the two colors together to paint something and see how it goes. Now, my original mix was pretty much yellow with, as you saw, a fraction of red and a fraction of white, thinking this would sort of counteract the darker tone of the red, but also add that warmer, the heat of the orangey gold I was after. It turns out the pigments all have different sort of strengths, especially when played with each other, and the red was definitely overpowering the mix earlier on. So I mixed in more yellow as I continued to work the pigment, getting closer to the color that I was after. Still quite dark and strong, but I figure when working with pure pigments and my base color paints, this is probably the good direction to go in anyway. With a golden orange color I was happy with, I went back to the red to thin the consistency very slightly to get the same sort of texture, and then mixed a little bit of color to see if I could color match my tube cadmium red. So let's do a little bit of color matching. I'm just gonna grab that tube cadmium red and put it right in the middle here. So let's grab the red and a little bit of this orange. It's still a little darker. All right, let's do the real test to see if I've done anything reasonable and usable. Try and use my oil paints. To make a liquid white, titanium white and linseed oil, and then you just whip it together until it's like a meringue. So I'm gonna go for a really sort of faint and subtle background sky. I was quite happy with the first layer, getting a bit of a blend. It was really fun to work with. I could see how this could work with more colors. You could do some sort of realistic landscape or whatever, which is what I started to think I should do, but then I thought, no, I'll do something different. I do too much Bob Ross. I do too much of the same stuff. I'm gonna do something else in the foreground, maybe a flower or something. I started it and I didn't like it. So if in doubt, pretend you were always gonna do abstract art from the beginning. Which is where I started to do some more expressive, geometric, textured, you know, palette knife scrapes.
What is that?
It's whatever it means to you, Gareth. Look, that's a dabble. That's a crappy artwork. I'm gonna go big. Don't feel disappointed. I'm gonna do my research now, and then I'm gonna come back and I am gonna make my whole line of epic oil paints, my own range. Big canvas, big paints, big ambition. But I probably should, you know, read the instructions. All right, it's time to educate myself a little bit. Now, obviously, my video is not a guide, it's not a tutorial. We're exploring something together and we'll figure out if I can figure it out. But there are lots of guides out there. And one that Rob has found that he highly recommended me check out is this one by Cesar Santos. I'm sorry for butchering your name. How I make my own oil paints, painting from the pigments. Now I've seen these glass things around and it looks really cool and I want one, but I don't have one. So I'm hoping you can make fine enough oil paints without one.
To make paint, we basically need two main ingredients. We need the oil. In my case, I'm gonna be using linseed oil.
Yep.
Also, you need a pigment. Pigments can come from
oil pigment! I nailed it! Cesar's video is really, really cool. I'm gonna link to it in the description. Now, obviously I don't need to go into all the details because you can go watch that after this video. But one point he makes that I can sort of understand now after my dabble is that this isn't a required process, but he finds it valuable, especially when he's making the paints that he's gonna be working with for his piece. Both practically, because he can figure out the blends and get the textures and consistency right, but admittedly, even from him, much more psychologically and emotionally, to feel connected with the medium you're gonna use in a way that feels like you made it from the beginning. I sort of get it. The level of emotional investment in a painting you're gonna make using the paints you made, I think would just be much higher. And we artists are sensitive types. And I'm really looking forward to making my own and painting with it.
I press it with the palette knife and I go like this.
All right, so he's testing the consistency now. So this is how he knows it's ready. He's got a big pile of paint there.
Press it with the palette knife and I lift it up. And if I see that the peak is still up, I think it's a good consistency.
That's such a cool tip. Ah, Cesar, bloody brilliant video, man. Thank you, Cesar, for making that. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people make their oil paint with the muller. Next time I'll get a muller. But for now, we're getting by, okay? Do what you can with what you got. Is what my grandpappy used to say. That's not true, he didn't say that. I talk a lot. Oh, and guess who else has done this before? Ray's done this before. Last year, Ray got a kit that I think included the slab, a muller, and pigments and oil, and basically did what I'm doing in this video, but you know, the way you probably should, following the instructions and with the right materials. So that's definitely a cool video to check out if you're enjoying the exploration of creating oil paints. I'll link to that in the description as well. But that's the do-it-yourself at home method of doing stuff, which we're doing. But this is what I was referring to before. Look at, oh my God, the industrial level of oil mixing is just so nice to look at, but so is just the at-home level of just the scraping. There's something about oil paints that's just so goddamn satisfying. So let's see if it's just as satisfying working to a small to medium scale with your at-home method and without a muller, because that's what I've got prepared today. So let's see how far I get. All right, let's just get comfortable and settle in for one of the most satisfying time lapses and working processes you will see in a long time. Honestly, emotionally, feeling like I was making the thing that I can make things with is really fun. Started off with the blue, going through the same process you saw me go through in my dabble, and then I started to realize, you know, I'm gonna be doing a few pretty strong colors here, and I have white as one of the things I need to mix up. Any color that ends up on the surface of what I'm mixing will contaminate the white. So I did white next to avoid too much color mess getting into it, to create the purest titanium white I possibly could. Ah, look at it, it's like meringue. Don't eat it, it's a forbidden snack, but god damn it, looks like a pretty good snack to me. Then I move through the rest of my primaries, the yellow and the red. The process is the same, but for some reason, the satisfaction just doesn't stop. And then finally, with my original batch, I mix a black. I did less of this in the same way that I did a lot more of the white and lighter colors because, like I discovered in my dabble, the stronger pigments really overpower the weaker pigments, so I knew I was going to need more white and a lot less black. Now, it was at this point that Dave from Tabletop Time in the studio, when passing through, suggested trying some other pigments that weren't artist pigments, which, I mean, I'm just too tempted by experimentation, so I gave it a crack. Starting off with Vallejo pigments. These are primarily used for miniature painting and diorama building to add sort of a dry texture and color to a final scene. Textures of dust and dirt. I used a green and mixed that in the same way, and it seemed to work pretty well, except that the powder in this instance was, I think, much finer than the pigments I was mixing my oil paints with originally. So as a result, it was hard to get a consistent texture that was both full and not too dry, but by default it ended up feeling too heavy and wet. And then I mucked around with concrete color oxides. These are pigments that you mix with cement to create a nice colored concrete mix. I used a sort of earthy red terracotta color, and this was surprisingly great. It's interesting, like obviously these are not made for making oil paints, but I know from having used them in many projects that they stain anything you put them on really effectively, and as it turns out, mix pretty well with oil to create at least an improvised oil paint. I've got all my core colors and even a few experimental outliers, and I needed to pick what I was going to paint. And I decided to paint Jinx from, well, I guess technically more League of Legends than Arcane, but my goodness, I love Arcane. And I picked it because I wanted to pick something with some fairly vibrant colors, and also, honestly, my style is just too cartoony in general, so I thought I'd work with my strengths here, since this was much more of an experiment showing off the color and the oil paint process more than, you know, my skills as a traditional oil painter. Using a picture reference that I would work from, I pre-mixed my primaries into a bunch of different appropriate colors that I could use throughout my piece. Going through this process from start to finish in creating the oil paints and then eventually the painting, and even adding this step here in the middle to mix the colors that I expected that I would need, and then adding enough variety that I could get experimental and play around the edges, was really fulfilling and also made me feel really prepared and primed up, ready to make an epic painting. This was really satisfying. Not only in texture, like just making the paint was really fun and I could do that all day. They felt great to use, like no different than any other oil paint, except better because they're mine. I made the oil paint that went into the painting, and it's actually a really fulfilling feeling to have done that. I don't think I'll do it every time, but I think I might do it again. So if I do, let me know in the comments what you want to see me make, and maybe next time we could switch it up a bit and muck around with pigments. We've done a little bit of experimenting with this one. Maybe next time we approach making our own oil paints. I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be oil paints. Maybe we could figure out acrylics and other ways of suspending pigments and figuring out making our own paints. There's a whole bunch of things we could do, but otherwise also let me know what you think of this piece and the oils and what you want to see in the future. Thank you so much for watching. This was so much fun. I really wanted to paint something arcane at some point, so I got to do that with my paints. See you guys in the next video. Nice.